this episode of Cultivate. Thank you so much for joining us once again for another conversation. Today is a special day. I mean, it's always a special day, but today's extra special because I have Hailey joining me here in the studio for an awesome conversation. I have known Hailey for 9 years. That feels like a long time. I met Hailey at a youth camp at Calvary. She was one of the youth, and we met there. We were the youth pastors, Alex and I. And so I've gotten to know her over the years and some of her story. And I'm just so happy and grateful that you decided to say yes and be here with us. Just have a conversation about life, growing up, different situations. And so thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Anything you ask, I'm here.
You're awesome. And you are just amazing in every way. Everything you do, you excel at. You do it with excellence. You are just an amazing woman. And I am so just honored that I've been able to see you, from being a 17-year-old girl at youth camp for the first time and seeing your life turn around and seeing all that God has been able to do in your life has been amazing. And I'm just so honored and grateful that I've gotten a kind of first row seat at your life. And so we're going to talk life today and hear a little bit of your story and your journey. Yeah. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to hear your story and it's going to resonate with them and help them and encourage them. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about life growing up, being a little girl, and some of the things that you faced.
Yeah. So growing up, originally life was kind of like normal for me, or what my normal was I grew up in Georgia. My dad lived in Miami, and my parents were divorced at the time. But that was kind of just, me and my sister would fly back and forth from Georgia to Miami 3 or 4 times a year, and that was kind of just how everything went, and it wasn't anything that seemed to be like wrong at the time. Yeah. I knew that it wasn't the normal per se because other people had different situations, but and other people had parents in the home and I didn't, but it never really affected much of the time. But then when I was around 11 years old, my sister and I were home and my mom got arrested for the first time, and that was kind of like the mark that said like, okay, like something's wrong, like this is not a normal parenting situation. A lot of kids have divorced parents. Not everybody watches their parent get arrested. So that's kind of like where things
did you watch that happen?
Yeah,
you did.
Yeah, we were in the house. We were actually the ones that I'm the one that opened the door to the police officer, and he like asked like, oh, like, is your mom home? And then my mom told us to go to the other room, but being curious kids, we kind of just hid around the corner, and we heard him like, oh, like we have a warrant for your arrest and that whole thing. And so then again she told us to go somewhere else, and of course we watched through the window because we're
who did you guys stay with?
At the time in Georgia, my mom's mom, so my grandmother over there
lived there.
Yeah, so the police don't leave you at the home without. They wait for someone to come and to pick you up. So at that time, I know that they like bailed my mom out like over like that night. So we really didn't have to like stay out of the home long. So we just kind of went back to normal.
What did you think? I'm trying to think of like an 11-year-old child. What would go through your mind? What went through your mind seeing that?
I think.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I think I know. I knew it was wrong. I knew that something was wrong. I knew that the pieces weren't adding up. I knew that there were like parts that were being hidden from us. But I also remember, and now I kind of look back and I'm so thankful that I did. I remember being like, I guess like wise beyond my years in the sense of like not asking enough questions. Like I knew I didn't want to know. Like for example, that first night, I remember my grandmother asking if we wanted to go see my mom, and I told her no. And I know at the time that my reasoning behind it was, if I would have seen her in that situation, it would have caused another layer of having to like process or go through or whatever, and I didn't want to see it for myself.
And so, but you knew that she did something wrong, and this is like the consequence of something she did.
Exactly. So then very soon after that is when she had like a boyfriend get involved. And once the boyfriend got involved, again, it was kind of just like, oh, he's a normal guy, and everything was just, he was now like living in the house at the time. And slowly but surely we started to see that he would get a little bit too aggressive, or he would drink a little bit too much, or he was a little weird when asking him questions about law enforcement or things like that. And then little by little, I guess just over time and over other family members asking questions, we started to piece together that like this guy wasn't a good thing.
Guy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it wasn't a good guy for my mom. And over time we realized that he was, it was a domestically violent situation that my mom had gotten into. And on top of that, we don't know to what extent, but we know that drugs were involved in the picture. Mm-hmm. On his end, we believe, but it's never been confirmed 100%, like on her end. So it's like we knew that it was just like not a good situation.
Did you ever see him get violent with your mom, or was that something that you didn't experience?
I feel like a part of my brain doesn't like remember all of that. Mm-hmm. I know that we did see him get violent in ways that were never 100% confirmed, like domestic violence, in the sense that like at first, mm-hmm. like when we were really young, because he would yell and he would go over the top, and he would I know that there were like holes in the wall at one point, and then that's again when things started mm-hmm. to really get revealed. The biggest part that I remember him being like, me saying like, okay, that's really not a good guy, was my mom and him took like an argument like outside at one point, and me and my sister were looking through the window, or at least me, I don't know if my sister was there, but I was looking through the window, and he's like trying to drive away, but as he's going to drive away, he's throwing stuff out the window at my mom, and he like kind of goes and like acts like he's gonna run her over before he pulls off, and then he like left. And so at that point, I grabbed all of the stuff that I could find of his, and I put it in a basket, and I take it to my mom before she comes back inside, and I say, like, Mom, like it's okay, like this is his stuff, like he can leave. Mm-hmm. And I remember my mom just looking at me and be like, no, he's gonna be back. And I was like, okay, like I guess like that wasn't enough at the time for her to realize.
Do you remember how that made you feel in that moment, or was it just disappointment? Or
I think it was like disappointment. Now looking back, it was probably a lot of like fear too, but it was like, okay, like I guess I just have to trust my mom. Like my mom is my mom. She's kept me safe up until this point, and I guess like at that time, like you're all I have in the home, so I have to trust that you know what you're doing, and that she was gonna kind of figure it out. But I think it did start to instill that fear and that like that disappointment of like, but why aren't you getting yourself out of this? And obviously now I understand a lot more of how that works, and it's a little bit different than that. But at the time it was just like, okay, but I don't understand why it's not this simple.
Yeah, well, you're allowing this to happen and not doing anything about it.
Right.
And so how did things change? I mean, I know that you didn't stay with your mom for a long time after that. Yeah,
so after that, a lot of this part was kind of like hidden from us at the time. Like we didn't really understand what was going on. But later on, we found out that somewhere along the way, social services was trying to get involved. Mm-hmm. And my grandparents were stepping in to say like, okay, like we need to get them out of the home before social services gets involved. And in that,
and takes you guys from the home,
and takes us from the home, because and that's where it kind of like confirms that there was, some type of drug use or some type of like extra layer going on, that social services knows about this, and it's a continuing thing. It's not something silly my mom got arrested for and it's over with. Right. It's like something is going on behind the scenes that we weren't
something extra that you guys don't know about.
Exactly. So then at that point, my dad who's living in Miami, he comes and he picks us up. 6th to 7th grade year, we transitioned to Miami.
How was your relationship with your dad at that point? Because you mentioned you kind of would go back and forth, so you had a good relationship with him.
Yeah, and I was a daddy's girl growing up. Like everything was my dad, and Even like I remember I had like a daddy doll that my grandmother made for us when we were younger, and like that was like I carried it with me like everywhere I go. Like my dad was like my like the pillar of everything that could possibly be right in the world. So he like I like moving down here, it was like I was excited because it's like, okay, a new adventure. I get to be with my dad. At the same time too, my dad was with my stepmom who she had gotten pregnant, and so we were gonna have my baby sister, and I always wanted a little sister, so it was like this whole new world of like everything's gonna be great.
How did you feel before we get to you moving to Miami? How did you feel, or how was that transition of you having to leave your mom? Because I don't know if maybe to you had all these questions maybe of why do I have to leave? Why is somebody taking me away? Why can't she come?
Yeah.
Do you remember what was that like for you at that point?
I think that since my parents disguised it so well with my sister being like born and that being the reason at the time that we were moving, it was just a lot of excitement. And then I know that in the back of my mind most days it was like, okay, like I know that this isn't safe. I know that something's going wrong, because I could slowly see the layers starting to like turn for the worse. So I knew it was what was best for us. And the same way that like I didn't want to see her like in jail or whatever, I knew not to ask enough questions. Like I sheltered myself from that in a way. So I didn't really ask questions, and I kind of just focused on the excitement.
So you move here, and how old are you at that point?
At that point I'm 11 and I'm about to be 12, so that summer.
Okay, so you moved here with your dad, and how's life now?
Then, so I moved with my dad, and my stepmom and my dad, we all kind of like lived together with my grandmother is living at another house really close by. And that's like that's our close, tight-knit family dynamic. My sister is born. I love my sister with my whole heart. She's like half of my world. And so she, like, I put like a lot of like my focus in like, oh, I just get to be a big sister now. And truthfully, my life with my stepmom wasn't the best. It was like still I'm daddy's girl, and like my stepmom and I didn't get along well. So it was still like my focus was still on dad and sister, and that was it. And then my relationship with my stepmom struggled for a lot of years because I kind of saw it as like, man, like my own mom is not here to tell me what to do. My dad is here to tell me what to do. You're not going to be here to tell me what to do.
So it wasn't so much so that it was her problem. It was more so that you were not ready to have that motherly, I guess, figure now step in and...
Yeah. I think it was a lot of that from my end was that, and that kind of like defiance towards that. And then on the other half of it, you know, my stepmom was young at the time, and she's having her first child that's hers as a baby. So she isn't acquainted with how to raise a child either. So it's like, now I look back and there's a lot of forgiveness in that, because it's like, you didn't know how to raise a teenager. You didn't get to raise a child, you know?
Right.
So I think it's a lot of learning curves and a lot of things that it was thrown to her like last minute, you know, where she wasn't expecting to have to raise us here. And so it just didn't wedge well in the first few years, I guess is the word for it. It didn't go well, because I'm not at the point that I'm ready. She's not ready. We're not ready. Yeah. And then I was a little firecracker, honestly.
But you lived with them for 4 or 5 years?
Yes. And lived with them is more like sporadic, I guess, because I would live with them, but then I would move in, move out, like in the sense of like whenever things would get a little bit chaotic at the home, or me and my stepmom were arguing again, I would call my grandmother. I would pack my things, go to my grandmother's house, stay over there for 2 to 3 weeks, come back, stay for 2 to 3 weeks, things will get bad, go
so
back.
You were kind of in and out.
Yeah, a little bit of a nomad in a way, going back and forth.
And then I know that at some point, I don't know what happened first, if you went to youth camp first or your dad moved first.
So that was the year of sophomore year. And in sophomore year, my dad had let us know that he was going to move to Orlando. And I told my dad, that if he's gonna move to Orlando with my stepmom, you know, he said it in a way that we're all moving, and I told him, like, I'm not gonna do that. Like, that's not a smart idea for me, because when things get bad with my stepmom, if I go there, like, I have nowhere to go. I don't have my grandmother there to balance me out. So I was staying back here. So he had moved sophomore year, like early on in the year, to kind of prepare the house, and my stepmom was still living here. And then I went to camp like that summer. So it was kind of like in the middle of that like transition when I went to camp.
And your dad was okay with you staying with your grandma?
At first, they kind of contested it, but once I explained the reason, they were like, yeah, you're probably right. And then my grandmother, once she gave in, yeah, it was like everything was good and everything was fine with that.
So how did you end up going to church? Because you didn't grow up in a Christian home. You didn't grow up with your parents, didn't go to church.
Right.
How did you end up going to youth camp?
Growing up, it was like the, I guess, Christmas, Easter type of Christianity.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was always like, she was committed to her church at the time. And so we did grow up going to that, like, church in that way. But what got me to Calvary was my cousin at the time had invited because of youth nights. And she had seen, like, you know, her or her mom had seen like the hype that youth nights were. And so she like roped me into youth on a Friday. And that first Friday that I had gone, Eileen was at one of the tables, and it was one of the tables for camp that they were promoting. And it was like, I had to go. Like, there was no negotiations. I had to go, and we made it work. Like, between here and then, like, you know, we made it work to be able to go, because I could tell that was the next step. Like, right now, like, life seems like it's about to start falling apart, and like that little voice inside of me was like, okay, like this is where we need to be.
How did you feel going to youth for the first time? Because I'm sure it was very different than anything you had experienced. So how did you know, like, love it? Like, how did you, or even your relationship with Jesus, how did you decide that this is what you wanted and that you were even gonna go to camp?
Yeah, I think walking in, and I still remember that, like, so specifically. I remember, like, walking into church, and it was like the middle of the hype songs, and I started crying. And I was like, I don't know why I'm crying right now. At the time, I was really becoming like this, like, hardened, like just, I can do life by myself. I don't need anyone. At this point, everyone's leaving. Like, my mom's not in the picture. My dad's leaving. Like, everyone's not involved. So I need to do life on my own. And I was becoming that kind of, like, hardcore type of personality. And so getting into, like church, I would, and Eileen would witness me doing it. I would start crying, and then the minute somebody would come try to tell me something, I was like, nope. I'd wipe my tears, and then everything was fine. And then we're just gonna keep on moving, and we're gonna keep on smiling, and everything's gonna be okay. But I knew in those moments that there was something different, because you don't just play music and just start crying. Like, that's not normal. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's the Holy Spirit. And, like, obviously I understand that now, but it's like, at the time I knew something was different. I knew that there was something in this that felt like peace, that felt like possibility, and felt like hope.
Yeah. So we just came back from youth camp a few weeks ago, and we did the girl session, and I had some girls go and share a letter to their younger selves, and you were one of those girls. Yeah. And some of the things you mentioned about that period of time in your life when your mom was out of the picture, your dad's now out, was that sense of loneliness and feeling not wanted.
Yeah.
And feeling maybe that you weren't good enough for someone to maybe fight for you.
Yeah.
Or maybe fight to be with you, go out of their way. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, walk me through that young girl who has these feelings, and what does that look like? Yeah,
I think, obviously, I acknowledge them now. At the time, I refused to. But now it's like, at the time, I was frustrated, and I look back and I see that, like, you know, my mom was choosing a man over us. Like, at the end of the day, as much as I wanted to ignore all of these things that were happening, that's what was happening. She was choosing a man over us. We would talk once a year. Whenever we talked, she would want to catch up about everything, and it's like, I don't Like you're not choosing to be an active part of my life. So now I don't feel like I have a relationship with you. I don't feel like you're choosing me. And that did, like, it honestly, it sucked.
Yeah.
Like, it sucked being a girl that grew up like without a mom, because then there's so much, like, so many layers to that of like, man, like after I come home from a hard day at school, or I come home because somebody's being rude, like I just want my mom to hug me. Like I just want my mom. And not being able to have that, it was something that I just got used to, and it became my new normal, and we kept on moving. But the reality was, like, when it came down to it, like that's all I wanted was a mom. And then being a daddy's girl, and it's like, no, but like you can't have him either. Like he's also going and choosing your stepmom and that life, and that separate than you. He's allowing you to stay in Miami. And something that I realized later on in life is like, there's no parenting in that. Like there's no, it's just a surrender of like, I'm a sophomore in high school. Why am I making my own choices?
Yeah.
You know, like why am I standing up against parents who are supposed to be older, supposed to be wiser? Why am I standing up against them? And why am I making my own choices in that way? And why are you letting me? There should be a defense in that. There should be parents that say like, hey, no, I make the choices for you.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you feel.
Right.
You're coming.
You're coming, and you're coming because I care about raising you as a daughter. So I felt like left out of my family. I remember there was a day that we were in like lunch at high school, and one of my friends at the time had mentioned, your family in Georgia looks like a white picket fence family without you. And I was like, that's strange. But then once you really think about it, they live in a home, mom and dad, at the time my stepmom and my dad and my younger sister, and they were then pregnant with my younger brother. So it's like, they're growing up, they're having their life.
It's like they moved on without you, and you were not even a thought.
Right. And then the reality set in of like, if something were to happen to me today, like their daily life doesn't change. And that was like the heavy hitter. That was the thing that really like it at the time, once I realized that from that person's comment in lunch, like that was like, okay, like now my family doesn't get affected by the fact that I'm not present or absent. It doesn't matter to them one way or another. And so at that point is when I really, like, that's when the loneliness of it all, like, and it hit me like, oh, like I don't really have parenting. And I had my grandmother, and I thank God for her, because she provided like all of that. She provided like the glue in all of that.
Yeah. But she wasn't your parent.
Right. And she shouldn't have had to. You know?
Yeah, I know you mentioned even being in, playing sports and being in whatever meetings you were in, and looking out, knowing that no one was there to see you.
Yeah.
And there was no one, and probably feeling like everyone else's parents, or one parent at least, was present, and kind of feeling like you were doing life on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. The things that really, like, those things that stung were like track meets. I did track all 4 years of high school, and my stepmom and I believe my dad was there too, showed up at 1. And other than that, like, it was all by myself. And there were parents that would come and bring snacks with their kids, and they would, you know, they would sit with their kids and they would cheer them on, they would take pictures, and it was like, it was family day for some people. But like for me, it's like they don't even know that I'm at a track meet today. Like they don't even realize that I run a sport. How do
you think that changed or shaped the way that you view yourself?
I think I've for a long time, it was like, okay, like I'm in this world alone. I'm here to fight it by myself. No one's ever going to stand by your side. Like, you need to fight your own battles. You need to do things by yourself. Like you mentioned at camp with the, you know, like girl, like fight your own battles type of thing. Like stand up and fight for you. I think that's what I did. So it's like, on top of that, like I wedged that gap too because of that and because of Jesus at the time. But it's like I was able to wedge that gap in a way that I refused to acknowledge any of the hurt at the time. But it wasn't, that doesn't mean that like it was easy. And I think that I developed this like independent mentality that everyone started saying like, oh, like you are wise beyond your years. Oh, you act so much older than your age. And then slowly but surely that even started to almost offend me because I'm like, I shouldn't have had to. Like I shouldn't have had to.
There's I guess a positive light to being independent and being strong and being able to figure it out. But with that also comes this idea that you, just because you could do it doesn't mean that you should have done it.
Right.
And so not only did it change how you view yourself and your life, but how do you think it maybe changed or shaped the way you view other people?
Yeah. I think that's what it did in me. It's like I viewed myself as independent, strong-willed, and I'll get through anything, and whatever it is, I'll figure it out. And I viewed other people as flaky, like everyone else is going to.
No one's gonna.
Yeah.
So when you thought about your future, if you thought about your future in that way, did you ever imagine having a family, having a husband or a boyfriend or someone that you thought could actually love you and not leave you? Or did you think maybe that you could have people, but everyone was gonna leave?
I think like the smallest part of my heart always hoped for it, or probably the biggest part of my heart hoped for it, but the biggest part of my heart also like refused to accept it. And I convinced myself that I was gonna be one of those people that like travel in a little van and like adopt my own kid. Like I wanted kids, and so I was like, okay, I'll adopt my own kid. Like I don't need people, everything's gonna be, fine. So then when I did meet like my now husband, I'm like, oh, like you're actually someone that's gonna stay. And that was like another whole area that like I had to learn and grow in, because I didn't feel like, even when we started dating, I wasn't committed to the fact that he was gonna stay. It was kind of like, okay, like I do want you to, but I'm also gonna do this so independently that I'm not gonna give a part of my heart to you, so that way I don't get hurt if you leave.
Yeah, I feel like I understand that perfectly.
Yeah.
Because I think that people who have had parents who are the closest to us, our parents are that sense of direction, and you're rooted, you're safe, your safety, right? When you have those figures in your life leave, not be present, not be who they're supposed to be in your life, I think it creates this thing in your mind where it's like, if my parents did that, then everyone else is gonna do it. Like, right. If the people that were supposed to take care of me and protect me at all cost didn't, then why would anyone else?
Yeah, nobody else owes it to me.
Nobody else.
If there's anyone that owes it to me, it's them.
Yeah, and if they didn't do it, then there's no one to trust. Because I feel, going back to the session at camp, I mentioned that to me, because I had that with my dad, I always had this underlying sense of, I always need to be ready and fend for myself, because when people leave, when this person leaves, when the marriage doesn't work out, when this person, just like this plan B just in case, because it's almost very matter of fact that something's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And you have to be ready, and you have to be ahead, and in this sense of, I feel like that's how I lived for a long time. Like, I love people, but I can't love them that much.
Right.
Because there's a part of me that I have to keep for myself just in case.
Yeah, and even like I think at the time I also like almost twisted like the biblical sense of like the guard your heart. I almost twisted that, and I'm like, no, this is me guarding my heart. And it's not. It's me, operating out of hurt, and that's not guarding your heart. Like, that's not how that's supposed to look. But I did that too. And even, like getting married, once I realized that I was going to be getting married, in my mind I still needed the house to be under my name. I still needed my own private card. I still needed like all of these things separate in my mind, and that's not how it's supposed to necessarily look. Like, I don't need to have a plan B, and it was very hard for me to surrender that plan B, like to let it go.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it was a supernatural moment when it, like, I don't think I worked for it, or I could explain it, where it felt like God was it was so clear for me that God was telling me, you don't need a plan B because there's this guarantee that life will be perfect, because there isn't.
Right.
You don't need a plan B because I am good, regardless of what happens.
Yeah.
So the hope is that things will work out and I'm good. But
Yeah.
even if they don't work out, there's this trust that needs to go beyond how you feel, to trust that even then, if that were to be the case, I am more than enough and I am more than your plan B. And
Right.
it took me a little bit to get to that place, but I felt like once it like dawned on me and it was like this piece that I couldn't explain, and then all of a sudden it was like a switch that all of a sudden I'm okay. All of a sudden I don't need to have my career and all this money in the bank account. And it was just like this freedom of, you are good regardless, and I can't live my life, held back because of fear. So tell me a little bit about, you got married and we'll get to that now, but that journey of you finding out these things about yourself, of you realizing, okay, I have these maybe rejection issues, maybe I have these fears, and how did God help you overcome those things? Like, I assume it was a process, but how did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it really, like, when I really started to accept and sink in was when I started going to therapy. And there was a day that, I'm talking with my therapist and she was like, I need you to admit something. And I was like, admit what? She was like, admit that your mom failed to be a mom, and admit that your dad failed, in a sense, to be a dad. And I was like, no, like that's so offensive. Like, I can't say that about my parents. Like, at the end of the day, in your mind, it's like, no, these are my parents. Like, I can't say that about them. But it's not necessarily like saying like, oh, like my mom is a failure. Like, she's not. She's a good person. We still talk every now and then. Like, she still cares in some capacity, but there was never but she didn't learn how to be a mom in a way that was effective for me, and my dad neither. They didn't learn how to be parents in a way that's effective for me. And so that's where the healing started to happen, when I learned like it wasn't a personal attack. Your parents didn't mean to leave you. They didn't say, like, they didn't wake up one day and say, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to traumatize my child. Like, that's not what happened. What happened was they weren't put in the right situation. They didn't have Jesus at their center. They weren't built on a foundation that could have supported you correctly. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't mean to. And that forgiveness is when I was able to start healing. And without that forgiveness, that wouldn't have happened. But I think that being able to see their perspective, being able to understand, like, okay, like, they're not meaning to hurt you, that's when the world of possibilities opened up. Because now, okay, people don't intend to hurt you. Things do happen, but some people could stay. And then that's when like possible options open up. Mm-hmm. And with Jesus, I think that that's the only thing that ever kept me centered in the first place. Like, no matter what was happening around, it was always like Jesus was always to come back to. And I always had Friday nights. And then I started having Sundays when I got older, and I always had camp, and I always had, like, Eileen, and I always had other people in the church community that, like, started to slowly prove to me otherwise, that people can stay, that people aren't gonna, and it's not something that fixes overnight. Like, childhood trauma can't be fixed in a night, and that's okay. But it was something that over time, it was like, okay, your childhood is separate than who you are now, is separate than who you are going to be. And so it's like, once I accepted that as a learning process and a growing process, I was able to start kind of letting Jesus into that part. Because for a long time, I didn't even let Jesus into that part. Like, that part was so guarded.
How did you come to believe that Jesus was trustworthy and he wouldn't leave you too?
I think it was like the only option. Like, I think that once I went to camp, it was kind of like, I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket because I have nowhere else to put them. And so if this doesn't work out, like, then like, I actually have nothing. But right now, this is all that I have. And so having Jesus be the only thing that I was able to rely on, he slowly started affirming that. over and over and over again. And in every situation, he showed up over and over and over again. And since then, like, obviously, like, life hasn't been picture perfect. Like, there's been 1,000 things that have happened since I decided, like, to kind of walk this out with Jesus. But I think that Jesus was the only thing that I could partner with at the time. Like, it was either me do it on my own or me do it with Jesus, one of the two. And I kind of, like, gave it a chance. And in giving it a chance, he proved it over and over again that it was real, you know?
Yeah. I love something that you said earlier. I was talking to someone about this not long ago. That sometimes it takes us to realize that the people that have hurt us didn't necessarily do it to us in the sense of with an intention. They, like you said, I love the way you put it. They didn't wake up one morning and thought, I'm going to ruin my daughter's life. Right. I'm going to ruin my son's life. I'm going to ruin whatever. It's recognizing that we are all human beings and that often our ability to stay, to show love, to be responsible, to have homes, families is directly related to what we received. And so sometimes people just cannot give, or they don't know how to give, not because they don't want to. They're incapable of giving something they themselves have not received.
Right.
And when it comes to healing and forgiveness, I speak for myself. It's a game changer when you realize that I can forgive when I understand that it wasn't about me.
Yes.
It involved me, but it wasn't about me.
Right.
And so I understand that you went through a lot, that you didn't have the tools, that somebody did this to you. And so in turn, you couldn't be this for me. Yeah. And I think understanding that brings so much. I think it's the little light switch to healing.
Yes.
Like, okay, so it's not that I'm not worthy. It's not that I'm a bad child. It's not that I'm X, Y, or Z. It's that this person just did not know how to be that for me.
And that's where it changed for me. It was like, okay, like, she just didn't know that. He just didn't know that. They don't know what they're doing. Like, then there was no parenting handbook. There was nothing that could have provided that knowledge for them. And like I said earlier too, even my stepmom, it's like, she just jumped into having a teenager overnight, and it's like nobody can expect you to get that right the first time. Yeah. And if you are expecting that as a child, we expect that because we just look up to mom and dad, and it's like they should know what they're doing. And I think once that's able to click, it changes everything, and that's where I found peace. That's where I found healing. Like, that's where that's where the journey starts. And then obviously, like, from there, then you start to see all of the layers. Like, you peel back the layers of, like, okay, like, all of this hurt and this perspective came from that. And then that's where, like, the therapy, the real heart of therapy, like, really begins. But realizing that is, and that's with, I feel like with any type of forgiveness, like, forgiveness is not just saying I'm sorry. And that's something I had to learn. Like, I had said I'm sorry. I'm not saying I forgive you. Forgiveness for me, when I was, like, growing up, they were like, oh, like, you have to forgive your mom. And, you know, once I started going to camp, it was like, okay, but you have to forgive her. You have to forgive her. And I was like, well, I've said I forgive her. But there was still a part of my heart that was still so upset of, like, but why didn't you show up? Like, why weren't you there? Like, I am your daughter. You were supposed to be there. That's your only obligation, was to be there. And you weren't there. And so as much as I said that I forgave her, that wasn't actual forgiveness. It's more than that. It's really understanding that your heart has forgiven, that you have genuinely let it go and said, okay, I understand where you're coming from.
And that sometimes it might take a while to get there.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things with forgiveness is that it's not you say it and it happened and, oh, I forgive this person and it just magically comes to be. It's a choice that sometimes you might have to make over and over and over and over again until your feelings and your emotions catch up to what you're saying. But it's possible, and you get there. And so you start going to church, you go to youth camp, you graduate, you serve at church, and then you meet this guy. Did you meet Chris at youth?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a youth leader. And we had come back from COVID. Actually, the story of like Chris and I was a very like God sent story. And again, now I really understand, you know, how all of that, like why God spoke to me in the way that he did for Chris, because he needed me to know like, hey, like I'm on your side in this, and this is something you can't put your heart in. Because Chris, before we started dating, I was at my best with God, like the absolute best part of my life with Jesus. I was like reading my Bible every day. I was on it. Me and God felt like we were on one team together, and it was the best it's ever been. And so at that time, I was like, I don't want a relationship. Like I am the best I've ever been with Jesus. I don't want or need anything else. And so I rejected everything that could look like a relationship. And then during like the COVID years, the 2020 year, I started to have like, there was like a night of like different dreams. And all of the dreams kept pointing back to like a relationship. And I was like, I don't like this. Like, I don't want a relationship. I've said no, Jesus. And then, you know, slowly but surely, I was like, okay, like, God, like, if you are trying to point in that direction, I'm going to let you lead, but I'm not going to stir into this. I'm not going to give into this. Like, I just want it to be me and you. And then there was a day that I'm at Walmart with my car broken down, and I had to call many like guys, because I need guys, and I'm a girl in Miami by myself, so I don't have my dad to come fix my car. And so I call every guy on my phone list that I could find, and I skip Chris. Like, he is like a C, and I'm like, skip him and go all down the list, because I kind of saw what God was trying to do, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna play into it, whatever. Nobody's available. So I call Chris, and he's like, hey, I'm there. And I was like, okay. And he comes, and as he's coming, you know, like I'm sitting and I'm like praying. I'm like, God, like, don't let this be like me putting my hand into anything. I know that you're pointing in direction of relationships right now. Like, I know you're trying to show me something, but don't let this be me. And there was like it was just a moment with me and Jesus that I was like, okay, like, this is kind of like, I know what you're doing, and if you are guiding this, I will accept it. And time again, like, God has like brought me back to like just that moment of like me knowing, because very soon after that is like Chris and I start dating, and like things are going great, and like there was so much confirmation that brought me back to that very moment, and it was like bringing me back to like the dreams and things like that were just like God was like, okay, like I'm in this, and it's okay to give your heart to him. Like, it's okay to allow him in. And then, you know, like, we go throughout like our relationship, and as we're dating, there were so many moments where I would feel a wall starting to go up, and God would somehow bring me back to that moment of like, no, like, you can put your trust in him. Stop. Like, we're gonna, and when I say like the full story, like, sometimes it's like, you know, like, not everybody gets those dreams, and not everybody, but the reason why I feel like God told me that and God revealed that to me is because he wanted me to always be able to come back to the moment of peace with him, and know that like, this is gonna be hard, like, this is not gonna be easy for you to go into a relationship knowing that this is the person that, you know, you're gonna marry. It's not gonna be easy to get to that point and to let all these walls down. So I want you to come back to me every time, and I want you to come back to this, and then we'll go piece by piece. And I feel like in that, like, God allowed like the layers to slowly, like, he didn't force me into it. He didn't like make it to where it was like I had to heal overnight in order to be in like this perfect relationship. It was like, things are gonna get hard, but every time it gets hard, I want you to look back at this moment, because this moment, I am telling you, I'm with you in this. You know?
I love that. That's beautiful. Hailey, what would you say, or what would you tell, you know, that person that might be watching right now, and maybe they are going through something similar, but maybe that person that's years removed from a similar pain or experience that you went through with, you know, that family, with feeling lonely, feeling not wanted, and maybe it's been years, but that's something that they know as they hear you speak, that that's something they're still dealing with. What is one way that you would encourage them to walk towards healing?
I think it's one, like, obviously, like, keeping your eyes on Jesus, like keeping your eyes on Jesus and continuing to model like what he did in the Bible. There's so many parts of the Bible where he could have been hurt, he could have felt betrayed, he could have felt all of these things, but he chose Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, he chose the right way to I guess respond. But more than anything, it's like, allow yourself to see outside of yourself. Like other people's lives 95% of the time are about them. And it's like, we see the world through our own perspective.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. But with forgiveness, it's like, you need to look into somebody else's perspective and step into their shoes and wonder, like, would I have made the same mistake? Would I have possibly been in the same situation? And, you know, just reaffirm yourself, like, okay, like not everybody leaves. Like, fight those battles in your mind of, like, it's not everybody. We're not going to generalize this. Just because it happened with one person, even if it's the most important person in your life, this doesn't happen every day. This doesn't happen with everybody. And controlling your thoughts and really telling yourself, like, challenging all of your thoughts and saying, like, okay, this is not, this thought doesn't sound 100% true. Like, if I'm telling myself that like, everybody leaves, is the word everybody true? No. Okay, let's challenge that. Let's take it, like, piece by piece, and just giving yourself grace, like, one step at a time.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being open and vulnerable. And I know that there are people that are going to hear this, and it's going to resonate, and they're going to know that, hey, there is hope for me. There is, you know, a way out. And so if you're watching today, thank you so much for tuning in. And always the hope and the prayer is that you would be encouraged, that maybe out of this conversation you were challenged to step out of your comfort zone and maybe step out of a place in your mind that you've been stuck in, and be challenged to believe that there's so much more for you. Maybe you some of these things resonate with you, and feeling lonely or feeling like there's a specific pattern in your life. We want to encourage you today to just believe that Jesus has freedom for you, that it is available, that you don't have to stay in a place of hurt, in a place of pain, in a place of unforgiveness, but that those things are available to you through Jesus. And so if you need prayer, if you need resources, let us know. Send us a message, leave us a comment. We would love to help you in any way that we can. But be encouraged and know that you are loved, that you are seen, that God is for you, and that there is a better day for you. There's a better future and a better tomorrow once Jesus is in your life. And so we love you, and we will see you next time.